to the Dethroning Your Inner Critic podcast. I have with me today Hannah Tackett, who is a coach who has dedicated herself to ending burnout for women. And I am very excited to have this conversation with you today, Hannah, because burnout is no joke.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm excited to be here. And I think the message is so important because I have talked with so many high achieving women who didn't even realize they're on the path to burnout until it was too late.
That's
So
right.
it,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that's a really important conversation that we have, right? Because why do you think it is, particularly as women, that we're so used to living with the emotions, the body sensations, the behaviors that come with burnout that we just sort of think that that's a normal, a normal life, a normal path?
I think that there's a couple aspects to it. I mean, there's like the signs and symptoms of burnout. And I think the biggest misconception out there is that burnout is like a switch, right? Like suddenly you're burnt out. Whereas really it kind of happens in stages because it's not a sudden crash. It's a silent buildup of stress over time, and
Yes.
it sneaks up on us. And like I think of it in three phases, right? So there's like that stealthy stress, and that's when stress is beginning to accumulate and we're like you're saying, we're not noticing it, we're not paying attention to it, we're pushing it down or ignoring it, and it starts to affect our daily life in more subtle ways. So maybe we're a little bit irritable, maybe we're short with our kids or snappy with our husband, or maybe we're feeling a little bit anxious or we're worrying a lot or dealing with some insomnia. I know poor concentration and brain fog, people don't typically think that that's a symptom of stress, but it is.
Yes.
And then there's like the tummy troubles and the headaches and the self-criticism that I kind of all comes together when we are stressed out and that stress is kind of piling up. And that's like the first stealthy stage where we normalize it. We're like, well, everyone feels this way. And it's true. I think most of us do feel this way at some point. And where that stealthy stress, that first initial stage starts to turn into what I think is what people typically label burnout is like there's this next phase. Like, so if we don't manage the source of that stress, we don't manage the symptoms and the actual stress itself, it can turn into that the second stage that I think of as like emotional erosion. And that's
Mm.
where this increasing emotional exhaustion leads to cynicism and dread and detachment from our work and our personal lives. And that's kind of like where you feel people feeling cynical. They start resenting their boss and their job and the mile long to do list that they have every day. And, or start feeling those Sunday scaries. Like I know when I was heading towards my
Mm.
burnout and I was ignoring all the symptoms, one of the big ones that I was ignoring was the Sunday scaries, only mine would happen on Friday afternoon around 3 p.m. I would just feel like my soul was dropping through my chair because I knew I had to come back and I didn't want to.
Mm.
And it would just taint my whole weekend because I just didn't want to come back.
Yes.
And so many people are experiencing this and they just keep on going. They're like, this, maybe I just have to live this way, but when we don't pay attention to those feelings and we don't address that detachment, we don't address the source of it, that turns into that stage 3, which is what most people are thinking of when you say the word burnout. And it's more like a performance paralysis.
Mm.
And in my life, it showed up as flat on my back in bed. I couldn't get up for months. I've talked with women who ended up in the ER. I've talked with women where they didn't necessarily manifest like a sickness that like took them down for the count.
Yes.
They weren't working. I mean, they were showing up to work and they were working all day, but they weren't getting anything done. It was like trying to push,
Mm.
up a boulder up a hill or like trying to wade through fog, like the productivity tanked.
Yeah.
And so when all this stress starts to build up, build up, build up, build up, build up, and then suddenly you're facing the consequences of that, whether that's a health crisis, whether that's a job crisis. Like this one woman was put on a performance review. She was a top performer her whole life.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
suddenly she's on a performance review because she just couldn't get through the fog.
Yes.
And that's when people are like, oh, I think I've burnt out, whereas
Yeah.
it's been happening for years.
Years.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So what would you say then in your work with your clients? Um, what are the warning signs of burnout that most women ignore?
So I think that the first one is, okay, stress does matter. Stress can be good for us, right? Like when you go to the gym and you work out and you're building your muscle and you're getting sore, that's like a good stress. But if
Mhm.
you kept doing that same motion over and over again every single day, all day long, it's no longer good stress. You're now destroying your muscle. And the same thing applies to our work lives and our personal lives and how we're showing up in the world. And I feel like the reason that we keep going
Yeah.
and we just don't stop and we don't take it seriously, we don't take our own symptoms seriously. I think it's like there's these like 5 success traps that I think
Mm.
of. And
Mhm.
there are behaviors that have driven us to success.
Interesting. Yeah.
But the same behaviors can drive us to burnout.
Mhm.
And so those are, the people pleasing and when you're taking on more than you really can to make your boss happy, make your husband happy, make your kids happy, make your friends happy, make sure everyone's needs are met, but your needs are way down at the bottom of the list. Maybe they're not even on a list. I know I myself and so many women, like they lose track of what they need. They lose track of what they even want. Like, what do you want
Yeah.
to eat for dinner? I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you want to watch on Netflix? Don't know. I've lost myself, making everyone else happy.
Yes.
And then there's like that, that perfectionism, which I'm sure you talk about, where we have impossibly high standards for ourselves and, a high level of attention to detail, which in moderation can be good, can drive us to success. Out of balance or rooted in fear, and we can talk about these fears that are coming up for people that are patterns that I see over and over again,
Yeah.
but like that are rooted in fear and the behavior goes too far. And then you end up trying to do everything at a certain level. And I think the worst thing that perfectionism can lead to is lack of delegation.
Mm.
Because when you feel like you have to do something perfectly to be worthy, right? Usually it's like I'm not good enough. I have to prove myself. There's an imposter syndrome going on. There's a level
Yes.
of perfection that has to be met. There's some inner criticism that's driving all of this madness.
Yep.
It's really hard to let go. It's
Yes.
hard to delegate and trust others because
Yeah.
they're not going to do it as well as you,
Right.
or at least not the same way that you would.
Yes.
And having that that mental shift from it has to be done this way, the way that I imagine it to be done, exactly the way that I want it to be done, to my level of detail and perfection, to being
Yes.
able to let it go and shift from being like a superwoman. Like I know a lot of us are superwomen in our lives, right? Like we're doing it all. We are rock stars. We are unicorns. We are kicking butt and taking names up until we are not. But
Yep.
yeah. And so like shifting from being that superwoman to being, I like to think of it as shifting into a leadership position.
Mm.
Because when you start asking for help, a lot of women think like I'm failing if I have to ask for help. I'm failing
Mhm.
to do what I need to do.
Yes.
That's not the case. That's not
Right.
the case. You're shifting from being like an independent contributor, being superwoman, to being a leader
Mm.
because you're empowering others to step up and help you fulfill a vision, whether it's a vision at work, whether it's a vision at home. Like you become the holder of the dream, the holder of the vision. And by allowing others to help you, you're allowing them to grow and step into
Mm.
their own power. And so there's like a big mindset shift between doing it all yourself and starting to reach out and ask for help and delegating and training others to step up and step in.
Yes. Yeah, so it's interesting what you're saying, and the thing that comes to my mind is sort of this paradox, right? Where when we think it's all up to us
Mhm.
and, we've got to get it all done, we've got to make it happen, right? Um, that's we might get to where we want to go.
Yeah.
But once we get there, that's when we recognize, wait a minute, this doesn't feel good. It actually had the journey to getting here hasn't felt good.
Mhm.
And now here I am, and I am completely depleted, completely drained. And maybe I've even left a trail of dead bodies along the way, right? Like our relationships certainly suffer when right when
Pushing.
we're
Yeah.
pushing ourselves to that degree. Um, so tell me, first of all, can you just talk a little bit about how you became a coach for people who are burnt out?
Absolutely. Well, it started with my own burnout. Actually, I burnt out multiple times, but the
Mm.
last burnout, the pivotal burnout, I had been in tech. I was working in tech. I've been in there tech for 16 plus years. And, the long hours, the ambiguous work, it's a little chaotic. And then also seeing thousands of people being laid off
Yeah.
in cycles.
Mhm.
And so I was working a lot. I was doing like five people's jobs. I was determined not to fail. I also had come from a slightly different background than most people, where, I was the first kid in my entire family to go to college. I mean, frankly, I think most of my cousins didn't graduate high school, but like I felt like an outsider. I was like, I have to prove myself. I have to get in there and show everyone that I'm good enough. Um,
Yes.
and so I was definitely in that mindset that I had to prove myself, that I wasn't enough, that I had to work constantly. I was terrified of scarcity. And I worked, frankly, way too much. And I
Wow.
never said no to anything.
Mm.
And so, of course, I burnt out. I did all the things, that would eventually lead to burnout. And the difference, though, with this burnout, I'm in bed, I can't get up, I go to the doctors, there's nothing actually wrong with me that's measurable by any means.
Yeah.
I'm just completely fried. And I was like, this can never happen. First of all, I have to fix this. Second of all, this will never happen again, because it wasn't just me. It
Mm.
wasn't just me anymore. I had two babies to take care of at
Yes.
home. I had
Right.
a marriage that, I cared about deeply. I had this career that, even though I resented it and was angry, I worked very hard for that career and I wasn't ready to let it go.
Right.
And I was responsible to pay the bills. So I had to fix it. Like this I had to get out of bed. I had
Yeah.
to find a way to heal. And I had
Mm.
to make sure that it never, ever, ever happened again.
Wow.
And the decision I made was, I was thinking this must be like a health thing, right? So I was like, I'm going to prioritize essentially myself. I'm putting myself first,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to heal and I'm going to recover. This is never happening again.
Mm.
And that led to a journey of healing and recovering, which took time, right? Anytime you run yourself that low, it does take time to recover.
Of
And
course.
it took a long time for me to figure out why I was burning out, because I mean, there were definitely external factors. Like people will talk about unequal pay, or unfair pay, or chaotic environments, lack of autonomy. All of that was going on, right?
Yeah.
But it was
Yeah.
also going on for everyone around me, and they weren't flat on their back in bed. So what
Interesting.
was the difference between me and them, right?
Good
The
question.
environment sucked for everybody.
Right.
I was the one that went down.
Yes.
So I had to take a look in the mirror and be like, what am I doing differently? Why am I the one in bed? Um, and along with that, I'm like, going to therapy, talking to acupuncturists, talking to all kinds of healers, and studying, reading hundreds of books, and then eventually becoming certified as a coach. And I learned so much about how we
Mm.
show up in the world.
Interesting.
And it is about how we show up in the world. It's not just those external factors.
No.
It's who
No.
we are. It's how we're showing up. And
That's right.
that can be shifted and adjusted. I was like,
Yes.
that's the key. That's the key. And really the secret key is like authenticity. And that was
Mhm.
like a completely eye-opening new path
So
for me.
explain that. Talk about the difference between how you were showing up in the world and what does it feel like now to be showing up in authenticity?
Right. So people are like, what does authenticity have to do with burnout? And
Yes.
the answer is everything. And that is the key. That is the unexpected key to ending burnout. And the reason why is, when we are showing up authentically, we
Mhm.
are we're in alignment with our own values. And when we step into alignment, we prioritize and align our actions with our core values and beliefs. And this reduces that internal conflict that
Yes.
can often contribute to burnout. Because if you're feeling that dissonance, that
Mhm.
resentment, that I'm off track, this isn't the right fit, I feel like a round hole being put in a square peg, like round peg, square hole, something like that.
Yeah.
Where it's a misfit, right? It's not working. So
Yes.
there's that dissonance. The distance goes away when you are being true to yourself and expressing your thoughts, feelings, and needs honestly.
Yeah.
That can reduce emotional exhaustion because it fosters genuine connection with
Mhm.
others and creates an environment of support and trust.
Mhm.
It enhances our self-awareness. And so with that self-awareness, we can understand our own strengths, our own limitations, and our own boundaries. And that awareness allows us to set realistic, sustainable expectations for ourselves and realistic, sustainable expectations for others in our lives.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that can prevent overcommitment that can lead to burnout. And so there's a lot of things that becoming authentic can do for us that is kind of is like a completely different direction than how many of us, I think, have been, picked up programming or how we've been raised or what we've ended up believing in, which is that we have to make other people happy,
Yes.
that putting ourselves last is noble,
Mm.
that sacrificing ourselves for the company, for our kids, for our marriage, that's noble. What ends
Yeah,
up happening is we end up resenting everyone and
that's
we
right.
end up tired.
Yes.
And I heard someone, I think it was Brendan Burchard, said that fatigue is the true killer of dreams.
Ooh,
Right. That's a good one.
love that. Yes. But there's something that you said that is really important, okay? In that you had this drive to prove yourself and
Mhm.
prove your value and prove
Yes.
your worthiness.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're not aware that that's really underneath all of this,
Mm-hmm.
okay? It, you know, I call that an addiction, okay? Like any addiction, right? If somebody's addicted to drugs and alcohol and they need, they need more and more and more of the drug or the alcohol or more alcohol to, get the high, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're not recognizing the addiction to proving our worthiness and proving our value, we need more and more and more of that drug,
Right.
right? So in terms of what you do now, right, which is to help people live in their authenticity, and I'm sure, right, you had to first come to that realization for yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to hear how how you deal with this sort of inherent drive to prove your worthiness and value now.
Absolutely. So I think that, like like you said, so it's rooted in a fear of not being enough, of not being worthy, which is perhaps a fear of rejection or a fear of a lack of belonging, or in career terms, maybe it's a fear of job loss or your business going under or a recession. But these fears that are driving the behavior, and the behavior is seeking out um, affirmation or proof that you're worthy.
Mhm.
And so by understanding the fear behind it, that there's a scarcity mindset, that there's a fear that there's a not enough,
Yes.
or that I don't belong. For me, it was fear of not enough. I think a lot of people, it's also fear of not belonging or not being accepted.
Mm.
And shifting your mindset. I mean, the fears are going to still come up, especially when you make any kind of change in your life,
Yeah.
because that's part of being a human being, especially being a grown-up human being, an adult, is that, those fears are there to try to keep everything the same. But as far as like dealing with those deeply rooted beliefs and mindsets, right? So I think knowing that it's there, and I have this exercise we call it the success mirrors, where we look at the behaviors that we have in our lives and like start to reverse engineer it into the fears and the beliefs that are driving them.
Mm.
And then once you're looking in the mirror, you can see like, oh, okay, so this fear is driving my behavior. I get it. Like I think knowing it is like the very, very first step. You're saying what are the steps?
Yes.
I think understanding that this is not fear is a mindset. It can be shifted, right?
Mhm.
I'm not saying you'll never be
Mhm.
afraid again. You will always have fear come up. But the
Yes.
specific mindset that's driving the behavior right now that's pushing you to burn out, like, yeah, you can shift that. You can shift those
Yes.
beliefs. And so, I mean, the first step is just understanding that it's happening. Like, you're not a
Mhm.
bad person. Like, this is normal. Actually,
Right.
it's pretty normal, more and more normal as we're going on. But that you can rewrite those fears and shift your beliefs. And the first step to that, I think, understanding this happening. Second is start looking for evidence to prove that that belief is wrong. Find another one that you can believe in that is better. Like, you don't have to, like, one day you feel like you're not worthy and you have to prove yourself, and that if you don't do 5 other people's jobs, you're gonna be laid off,
Yeah.
right? In like 2 minutes, you're not gonna be like, I am worthy. I can just kick back and everything's going to be okay. It takes a
Right.
little bit, like there's like baby steps, you know.
Yes.
Maybe the first step is taking a look at your calendar and realizing that you can decline a couple meetings and
Mm-hmm.
just leaning into that, and then watching for the evidence that you are okay. Like you are
Yeah.
not unworthy for not being triple booked all day. And the
Mm-hmm.
evidence is there. And one beautiful thing about the human mind is that when you start believing in something, when you start looking for evidence, you will find it.
Yes. Yeah.
So look for that evidence that you are worthy and you will find it.
Right.
And there are little things that we can do to test it, whether that's declining a meeting,
Yeah.
making some room for something that brings you joy,
Yes.
and seeing
Yeah.
that the world around you will start to shift and start
Mhm.
to respect you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but what happens when the fear of the shoe dropping, the rug being pulled out, right? Like if I stop worrying about this, if I stop, over functioning here, my kid's gonna fail, or my boss will think less of me, or I won't get my business to the next level. Like, how do you deal with people's fear that the rug is going to be pulled out from under them?
Well, there's two ways. One is I mentioned kind of like experimentation, right? Do a little test, run a test, run an experiment in your life and watch for the evidence. The
Mm,
other is, I think, understanding some realities about what human productivity actually is. So there's a myth that human productivity is linear,
mm,
and that if you keep pushing, keep leaning in, you're going to keep getting better and more results. And that is not the case.
mm,
Human productivity is more like the tide, right?
yeah.
It ebbs and it flows.
Mm,
The most creative, imaginative people in the world who get amazing results intentionally have white space in their lives, because that's when the ideas come. That's when the synchronicities happen, is when you're taking a shower, going for a walk, going for a long drive, when you're doing something that is not doing something.
yeah. I love that. Yep.
And
Yep.
so when you start to allow white space, margin in your life, those ideas, those brilliant ideas, those synapses that form will show you ways to get it done that will save you so much time.
Mm,
You can get more done in less time and with more efficiency when you have clarity and rest in your life. And that
interesting.
is a fact.
Yeah.
So I think that when we understand like the constantly on, the leaning in, the constant push is
Yes.
actually detrimental and sabotaging our ability to get what we want in life.
Yeah.
And then realizing, okay, human productivity actually doesn't work that way. The people who are doing amazing in the world, the people who have changed the world for all of us, went for long walks in the woods. They
Hmm.
took months off.
Mm,
And when
yeah.
you realize that that's the reality, that's the fact, you go read books about people who have made massive changes for the world. They were not
Yes.
on all the time. They guarded their time.
Yeah.
They were careful with how they spent their time. And this idea that we need to be busy to be successful is wrong. It's
Yes.
incorrect. It is a lie.
Mm,
And once we accept that, they're like, oh, it's a lie. Okay. And now I'm going to go do little experiments to prove it to myself in ways that kind of calm my anxiety. And then those things come together and you're like, now I'm on a different path. I'm giving myself
wow.
white space and I'm seeing the results.
So what are some examples, like if somebody's listening and they're like, what does that mean to give myself white space? Give some examples of what that looks like.
Right. So schedule time for downtime. So I was guilty of having a triple book calendar. I was terrified of saying no to anything. So I was constantly slammed all of the time. And people were like, well, why aren't you in this meeting? I'm like, because I'm in two others. You know,
Yeah.
and like you said, I was like, I felt like I was needed. And if I was needed, I must be worthy.
Mm,
I wasn't being very effective though.
right.
Right. And I
Right.
was tired. I was very tired.
Yes.
And so when I started to decline meetings, and not only decline meetings, but block off space on my calendar for nothing,
Yeah.
for nothing to happen,
Wow.
I got a lot more done, obviously. And I solved problems in ways that were creative, in ways that other people weren't solving them.
Mm,
And by doing this, I started to have conversations with people Oh, you want that done? Well, we have these resources. Would you like to increase the resources or increase the timeline?
Yeah.
And learning how to have these conversations. And that's part of what I do with the women I work with, is we learn how to ask for what we want and get it. We learn the ways to say no that are constructive, that
Hmm.
will accelerate your career, not get you fired. Like there's ways to
Yeah.
say no that help everyone. You are doing
Yeah.
everyone a favor by saying no in the right way.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
by learning the skills, it's just a skill.
Yeah.
There's, saying no is a skill, and some of us never learned it. And that is okay, because
Right.
it's just a skill and you can learn it. But yeah, learning how to say no and learning how to ask for what you want and get it, combined with taking steps to create space in my life,
Mm.
ended up creating a lot of space. I was working a fraction of what I was working before, which was good because I was working insane and unsustainable hours.
My
And I was
goodness.
getting more done. I got more respect. I got promoted. I got the job of my dreams. Like the world opened up, all the doors
Yeah.
opened,
Yeah.
and I had a lot more energy.
And then you left that career to create a totally different career.
So in the process of doing
Uh-huh.
all of this, I talk to women. I'm talking to my team. I'm talking to women I meet at conferences. I'm meeting all these people going through my life, right? And more women I was talking to, the idea of burnout, this concept of burning out, this struggle, this overwhelm was a consistent theme. And I was like, oh, this is not just a me problem. This is not just a me problem. And what people are being told to do, which is, take a sabbatical, take 2 weeks off, quit your job, go take a different job. Like those don't necessarily solve the problem, because you're not dealing with any of the root fears that are driving the behaviors
Right.
that are leading you to burnout, because you can burn out doing anything.
Yes.
Um, and also I've seen it cost people quite
Mm.
a bit. I know a woman who, she was making, $500,000 a year. She had millions of dollars in RSUs. She quit her job, walked away from it all, lived off of savings for 4 years. It took her 4 years to recover enough
Wow.
to get back in the game, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and she regretted it. She was like, I know I had to do that because I didn't know any other way. But my goodness, if I could go back in time and save myself, it ended up costing her $2 million to recover from burnout.
Wow. Wow. Talk about a life lesson. My goodness.
Right. And
Yeah.
so it's expensive, and people don't realize how expensive it is to burn out,
Mm.
because all these things that you've built in your life, the success, right? Like
Yes.
beautiful marriage, wonderful children, the job, the career, the business,
Yes.
built it all. And you're like, I'm not here for this.
Yeah.
I am a shell of a human being.
Oh, yeah. So talk to the woman right now who's listening, right? Who is burnt out. She knows she's
Mhm.
burnt out. She's in a career that is totally unfulfilling. She knows she doesn't want to be doing this. What's the next step for her?
So the next step is acknowledging that this is important. This is
Mm,
important. Do not ignore it. Don't wait till you're in the hospital. Don't wait till you've
mhm.
burned down everything in your life. You don't
Yes.
have to burn down everything in your life.
Yeah.
So that's the first step, is this is important. This matters. Address it. Address it now.
Yeah.
And so the steps to doing that are, I put together this, this 5-step method. I call it the peace method, right? So the first step is to pursue your yes. And what that
Mm,
means is, stepping into authenticity, getting really, really clear on what matters to you now in this
yes.
season of life,
Yep.
and releasing all of the shoulds,
Mm,
right? You don't have to achieve success the way that they did. There's
yes.
so many ways, so many paths to success.
Yes.
Your outcome can look the same. The way you got there can be totally different.
Right.
Um, Ditch the shoulds. You don't have to fulfill other people's expectations. Get clear on what matters to you now and start pursuing it. And the second is energize your being. And that is taking care of ourselves, right? So eat for energy, improve your sleep, connect with loved ones, incorporate joyful movement in your life, reset your nervous system, and release the trauma.
Mhm.
Address the trauma that driving those fears that are driving you, whether it's seeing a bunch of people be laid off, whether it was growing up in poverty, whatever it is,
Yep.
that's the trauma that's real. Okay. It's
Yep.
scary to see that happen. Those are real traumas.
Yes.
So address the trauma, release the trauma.
Yep.
And then the third step is asserting your voice. And that's where we learn how to ask. We learn how to ask for what we want and get it. learn the ways to say no and practice. Practice makes
Mm.
perfect, gain some confidence, and then address sabotage. So anytime we go about making any kind of behavioral changes, any kind of changes in our life at all,
Yeah.
there will be sabotage.
Yeah.
And that is okay. You are
Yeah.
not a bad person. It will happen. So just plan for it. Like you're going to experience sabotage. And then if you've done those three things, if you start doing those three things, you will have more energy, you will have more time,
Mm.
and you will have more clarity.
Yeah.
And then
Wow.
the next thing, right, is to claim that surplus. So now you've got those things that you've been wanting, you desperately need in your life.
Yeah.
Claim it for yourself and focus it on what matters to you. Don't let somebody else come and claim that energy and take it away and use it
Mhm.
on their initiatives. You make sure that that energy goes where you want it to go.
Mm. Oof. Takes a lot of courage. Yeah.
Baby steps. And
Baby.
then just seeing the evidence, seeing the changes happen.
Yeah.
And it takes a little bit of courage and then some proof. And
Right.
you can get that proof just by doing the work.
Right. Right. And sometimes in the in between before you get the proof, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just gotta keep leaning into your values, your truth, and
Mm-hmm.
acting from there.
Yes, you have to be able to suspend your disbelief for a
Mm.
period of time because it's coming. The evidence is coming.
So important. So important. You mentioned something about the secret to burnout, that there's a surprising secret to ending burnout. What is the secret key to ending burnout?
That would be stepping into authenticity because it
Mm,
is so counterintuitive. We think
yeah.
doing less is the key to ending burnout. We think sleeping more is the key to burnout. We think that quitting our job is going to end burnout.
Yes.
And those things might help alleviate the stress. And the stress is definitely what's causing the burnout, right?
Yeah.
However,
Mm,
if you're still not living authentically, even if you're doing less,
hmm.
you are still going to have that dissonance. You
Yes.
are still going to be sucked down.
Yes.
So even if you're doing less, even if you're conserving your energy, even if you're doing all these stress management techniques and you're meditating every single day and you're checking all the boxes, oh, there's those
Yeah.
boxes again. We all have to check our check boxes. But even if you're doing everything quote right,
Yeah.
not in alignment with your own values, your core values, and what's
Yeah.
important to you in this season of life, not the
Yeah.
you 5 years ago, not the you that your parents told needs to go and be a doctor, the you right now,
Yes.
then
Yeah.
you're still gonna be dragging. Might be
Yeah.
doing better, but you're
Mhm.
still gonna feel that resistance.
Right. I could not agree more with you. I mean, that's the whole basis of my work, right? Is
Mhm.
having people unhook themselves from their automatic selves and really stepping into their authenticity. So I love that you're doing this work in the world. It's not just important for us to, right, so that we can take
Mhm.
care of our health, our physical health, our emotional health, our mental health, our spiritual health. uh Burnout creates a ripple effect.
It does. It does. And the people who burn out, we're givers, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're the people who care about others.
Yes.
And so while it's counterintuitive to prioritize yourself, be like, being authentic is my number one. Taking care of my health is my number one.
Mm,
Um, but by doing that, you become so much more powerful in a way that helps everyone around you.
amazing.
It'll I mean, I've seen massive changes in relationships by becoming authentic.
Yep.
Marriages that were on their way downhill turned around because became authentic and they learned how to ask for what they want and get it. And it just shifted the dynamic and it changed everything.
Right.
So it's not just about career burnout like this, the trickle effect of this work is enormous.
Yeah, because it affects every single important area of your life.
Absolutely. Yes, it
Yeah.
does.
Wow. So it's almost like you could say that the experience of burnout is the wake-up call.
It
It's the
is.
awakening that it's really time for you to start looking at things that perhaps you haven't looked at for your whole life.
Absolutely. And I think
Mm.
the red flag to tune into, because I mentioned a lot, right? There's a lot of things, a lot of symptoms. Resentment. When you
Resent.
start feeling resentment,
Yep.
don't wait till you're in the hospital. Don't wait
Mm.
until you want to divorce your husband and quit your job.
Yes.
The minute you start feeling resentful, that's a red flag. that
Yeah.
something in the way you're showing up in the world needs to shift and change.
Yes. Oh, I love it. This is really a very powerful conversation. Where can my listeners find more information about you and the work you do in the world?
Absolutely. So you can find me at serenesuccess.net, and I have a quiz there. It's the end burnout quiz where you can kind of identify where you are in your journey and then what the best next step is for you.
Mhm. Great. Fabulous. Thank you for this conversation. It is a really important conversation. And I hope those of you that are listening that are questioning, I think I'm burnt out, use this as a wake-up call. Maybe there's a reason why you're listening to this episode today. So thank you, Hannah. Thanks for a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such an honor.